The white dress stuck to her back where the blood hadn't yet dried. Ada didn't cry. Not when they tied her hands to the post, not when the sheriff read the charges, not when the first lash landed across her shoulder blades. She kept her chin high, eyes fixed on the dusty plank road where the church bell still echoed. For loving a savage, the pastor had said, for laying down with what God never made for us. But it wasn't sin they punished. It was defiance. Ada had stood in that same church 2 weeks earlier, dressed in lace, her fiancé standing stiff beside her. But the man she'd met beyond the ridge, the one who'd given her medicine when her sister was sick, who never asked her name but remembered her silence, that man was the one who stayed in her mind. And someone had followed. Someone had seen her leave with berries in her hand and come back with her hair unpinned. Now the crowd gathered like flies. Men who once tipped their hats now spat near her feet. Women she'd stitched quilts beside stood stone-faced as the whip cracked again. She didn't scream. She wouldn't give them the song they wanted. But just before the fourth strike, the sheriff paused. His eyes flicked past the crowd. A single figure stood at the edge of the square. Tall, dark hair in 2 long braids, shoulders like carved stone. A Lakota man. He said nothing, moved not an inch. But his eyes were fixed on Ada. On her face, not her body, not her shame. The sheriff cleared his throat and looked away. The next lash never came. Silence spread like fire. Ada turned her head just slightly, enough to see the stranger. He hadn't come with horses. He hadn't come with fire. But somehow he had come with power. And the town that had condemned her forgot how to breathe. He didn't flinch when the whip dropped. He didn't speak when the sheriff stepped back. He simply stood there, arms at his sides, as if the wind around him was waiting for his permission to move. Ada was unbound in silence. No one dared say why. The pastor cleared his throat and muttered something about mercy, but the shame had already been carved into her skin. They left her there, dress torn, back red, barefoot on the wood, like she was an object no one wanted to claim. But the Lakota man remained. Ada's legs trembled as she tried to step down, her hands bloodied where the ropes had rubbed raw. Still no one helped. Not the sheriff, not the women, not even the man she had nearly married. She stumbled once, almost fell. And that's when the Lakota moved. 3 strides, quiet as dust. He didn't touch her. He simply stood at her side, eyes on the ground, body still. The crowd parted for him like water, but he looked at none of them. Only when Ada leaned against the post again, dizzy, did he extend one hand. Open, palm up. No words, no nod. Just a choice. Her former fiancé stepped forward then, a shout on his tongue. "She's not yours!" he barked. "Go back to where you belong!" But even he didn't step closer. Not with those eyes on him. Not with that silence pressing down like thunder. Ada looked at the hand again. It was broad, strong, scarred along the thumb like it had seen real work. She reached for it. The moment her fingers touched his, the sound returned. Boots shuffling, whispers rising, gasps like someone had stolen all the air and given it back too fast. He helped her down. One slow step at a time. When her foot hit the dirt, the pain nearly buckled her. But he steadied her, arm gentle behind her back. Together they walked, not toward the jailhouse, not toward the saloon or the church, but toward the open road. A little girl in the crowd whispered, "Is he taking her?" Her mother hushed her sharply. "She's not worth it." But the Lakota didn't turn. He just kept walking. And Ada, though each step burned like fire, walked with him. For the first time in her life, shame trailed behind her instead of leading the way. They said she had brought shame to the church, But Ada remembered every cruel eye in that town long before she'd ever met the Lakota man. She'd been too tall, too opinionated, too unmarried for too long. She made dresses for half the women now calling her a whore. Her sin wasn't love. It was refusing to stay small. The Lakota's name, she would learn later, was Wicasa. He didn't offer it, not that day. He walked her past the mill, past the old creek bridge, and when her legs gave out, he helped her onto a flat stone by the river and knelt without a word. She sat, bleeding, humiliated and burning inside. "Why?" she rasped. It was the only word she could form. Wicasa didn't answer. He dipped a cloth into the stream, wrung it out with care and pressed it to her back. She winced, but his hand was steady. "They think I laid with you," she said bitterly. "They think I betrayed white blood for yours." He didn't blink, didn't react, just continued tending her like it was a wound he recognized, not just on her skin, but deeper. Ada looked up at him. Really looked. His eyes weren't soft. They weren't hard either. They were ancient, like they'd seen 100 brides humiliated for the same reasons. "I didn't," she added, suddenly defensive. "We only talked, that day in the meadow when I brought you those berries. My sister had fever. You gave me willow bark. That's all it was." Wicasa paused. His gaze held hers, and then, slowly, he nodded once. She didn't know what that meant. Acceptance, forgiveness, confirmation, but it steadied something in her chest. "My fiancé," she whispered, voice trembling. "He's the one who followed me. He's the one who told them." Wicasa turned away, rinsed the cloth again. "He didn't want to marry me. Not really. But my father had land. So he stood up there beside me in church, waiting for the deed to pass. But when he saw me come back smiling after that day, after talking to you, he told them I'd gone to your camp. Said I offered myself." Wicasa's jaw tightened for the first time. That was the only reaction she got. He didn't comfort her. He didn't deny it. He just knew. Ada let her head fall into her hands. "I was never his, but now I'm no one's." And Wicasa, still kneeling beside her, said his first words. "Then start there." The truth didn't unravel all at once. It came in splinters, like bark in a wound that kept rising to the surface, no matter how often she washed it. The next morning, Ada woke beneath a pine lean-to Wicasa had built, with just 3 branches and a hide. Her dress was gone. In its place lay a folded blanket and a length of soft deerskin stitched into a shift. Her back still burned, but the bleeding had stopped. Wicasa had disappeared at first light, but not without leaving her a strip of smoked meat and half a canteen. He was a ghost. There when needed, gone when not. She didn't know what to make of him. She wasn't even sure he meant for her to stay. But her legs wouldn't carry her back to town. And her pride wouldn't let her try. By midday, he returned with something in his hand. A newspaper. Crumpled. Stained. "Page 3, he said. She blinked. "You speak English?" He didn't respond, just pointed. She opened the paper with shaking fingers and read the headline, "Land Transfer Finalized. Sheriff Buys Out River Homestead from Mayfield Family." Her mouth went dry. Mayfield. Her family. Her father's land. Her fiancé's interest. The article explained what she hadn't seen coming. The sheriff had agreed to forgive her father's debt if he signed over the deed. The signing had taken place 2 days before her punishment. 2 days. Her stomach turned. "They planned it," she whispered. "They needed a reason to finish me off, make it clean. A woman caught with a Lakota, disgraced, disowned, unwanted." Wicasa said nothing. He didn't need to. Ada stood, furious now. "My fiancé lied about me, and they used it to get the land. That's why the pastor called for public discipline instead of private shunning. They wanted the town to turn its back on me. Wanted me gone." Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. "And they got it." She crushed the paper in her fist, breath shallow. Wicasa met her eyes then, and for a moment, she saw something. Not pity, not anger, but understanding. "Where I'm from," he said quietly. "They shame women when they're afraid of their strength." Ada swallowed. "And here?" "Same." It wasn't enough to fix what had been taken, but it was the first time someone had said the truth aloud. Ada sat back down, legs trembling. The town had written her off. But now, for the first time in her life, she had no name, no ring, no home, and no leash. She exhaled slowly. "Then let's not go back." It took 3 days for Dry Creek to notice she was truly gone. At first, they assumed Ada had slunk off toward the Eastern Trail, maybe thrown herself in the river. No one admitted they cared. But when the dressmaker's shop stayed locked, when the altar cloths weren't stitched in time for Sunday, when old Mrs. Burney realized no one had come to tend her swollen ankles, murmurs began. "She didn't even take her things," one woman noted, eyes narrowing. "Not even her mother's quilt." But the sheriff waved it off. "Good riddance," he grunted. "Let her play squaw in the woods if that's what she wants." Yet the air in town felt different, like something familiar had gone missing, but no one wanted to name it. Children whispered about the whipped bride who walked off with the Lakota. The saloon girl stopped laughing when her name came up. And Clara, the blacksmith's wife, kept glancing out toward the pines, rubbing the silver bracelet Ada had once repaired for her without charge. Meanwhile, in the forest beyond the ridge, Ada was learning to move without apology. Wicasa taught her how to layer pine needles for warmth, how to trap rabbits with string and bone, how to cut a path by reading birds instead of stars. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words stuck. "You walk like someone waiting to be told it's safe." "I've never known different," she replied. He didn't nod or argue. He simply showed her where the wild mint grew and left her to decide if she'd take it. One night, as she built the fire, she asked, "Why me?" Wicasa didn't look up. "You were already standing before I stepped in." She watched him quietly. "What do you mean?" "I've seen women scream, seen them beg, seen them crumble." He finally met her gaze. "But you stood." Ada stared at the flames, jaw clenched. "Standing didn't stop them." "No," he said, "but it shamed them." She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. That night, for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. Back in town, the man who'd nearly married her was asking questions. "You sure she's not in the hills?" he asked the sheriff. "We could—" "She's not your concern anymore," the sheriff snapped. "You got the land, that's what matters." But he didn't believe it. Not fully. Because late that night, a rider slipped out of town, lantern doused, following a trail that no longer wanted to be found. She heard the horse before she saw it. Slow steps, deliberate, like it didn't want to be noticed. Wicasa had already stood, bow in hand, crouched in the shadows of the pine. Ada stood too, breath held, heart pounding. The rider dismounted just beyond the firelight. "Ada," came the voice, familiar, sharp, trembling with a false calm. "It's me." Jeremiah, her former fiancé, the man who'd stood beside her in church, speaking vows he never intended to keep. He stepped forward, hands raised like he meant peace, though the pistol on his hip stayed too visible. "I just came to talk." Wicasa didn't move. He stood like a statue between them, unreadable. Jeremiah sneered slightly. "Didn't expect you to be living like this. With him." His gaze moved to the lean-to, the fire, Ada's borrowed clothes. You really traded a house for this? Ada didn't flinch. I traded lies for truth. That's worth more than your name on a deed. His face twitched. You think you're better now? That people will forget what you did? You think you're clean because he didn't touch you? Wicasa stepped forward once. Just once. Jeremiah went silent. The fire crackled between them. Ada's voice didn't waver. You told them I was ruined, but you're the one who begged for my father's land while planning to leave me right after the ink dried. I had a future to think about, he snapped. I had plans. So did I, she said, until you sold mine for your own comfort. For a moment, the forest went still. Even the wind seemed to wait. Jeremiah's face crumbled slightly. You were supposed to be mine. No, she said quietly. I was supposed to be free. He looked at her, then at Wicasa. So that's it? You're going to stay out here? Be his, what? Pet? Project? Wicasa's voice came like low thunder. Go. Jeremiah's eyes darted. You don't tell me what— You will leave, Wicasa said again, because the man you were is dying. You feel it. That's why you came. Jeremiah stood frozen, mouth open, like something had cracked inside him. Then, without another word, he turned and mounted his horse. The sound of hooves faded into the night. Ada's knees went weak, but she didn't fall. Wicasa didn't offer comfort, just nodded toward the fire. She sat again, skin cold but breath steady. He'll come back, she said. No, Wicasa replied. He saw a woman who no longer needed to be claimed. That's what broke him. Ada said nothing, but in her chest something unclenched. The next morning she found it folded beside the fire, a red and cream woolen blanket with black diamonds woven into its edges. It wasn't store-bought. It wasn't something she'd ever seen in a white woman's home. Every stitch was hand-woven, the fabric slightly coarse but warm. Purposeful. Wicasa didn't mention it. He was off near the ridge, gathering wood, his movements as silent as ever. But Ada knew what it meant. In his world, what little she'd gleaned from overheard whispers and stories that filtered into white towns, a blanket was not just warmth. It was offering. It was place. She wrapped it around her shoulders slowly, like she was trying on a new name. The fire hissed softly as she knelt beside it and whispered, Thank you. Wicasa returned with kindling, said nothing about the gift, only nodded once when she met his eyes. That morning they worked side by side, clearing brush, stacking stones into something like a perimeter. Not quite a home, not yet, but something between. A beginning. Just before midday, another figure appeared. Ada saw him first, tall, younger than Wicasa, with a bow slung over his shoulder and a smirk he didn't bother to hide. I came for the story, he called out. Wicasa turned, unimpressed. This is my cousin, he told Ada. Matto. She's real? Matto asked, circling her once like inspecting a painting. The whipped bride? Ada raised her eyebrows. And you're the village gossip. Historian, he corrected with a grin. The kind who likes to know why a woman would leave the world that crowned her, just to sleep under stars with a man who barely speaks. Wicasa gave him a look that said the teasing had limits. Ada, to her own surprise, smiled. Because the crown came with chains, she said, and the stars don't ask anything of me. Matto studied her more carefully after that. She's not just a story, he muttered. Wicasa nodded. That's why she stays. They spent the afternoon quietly. Matto left before sunset, but not before placing a pouch of herbs in Ada's hands. For the scars, he said, on your back, not your skin. She didn't reply, but her fingers closed over it with care. That night, wrapped in the red blanket, She sat beside the fire while Wikasa carved a small figure out of wood. It looked like a woman standing tall, arms unbound, chin lifted. When she asked if it was her, he said only, "It's who you already were." Ada didn't cry, but the firelight caught something wet on her cheek anyway. And for the first time, it wasn't from pain. It started with smoke, not from their campfire, but farther east, where the old cedar line met the base of the trail Ada once walked in silence. Wikasa saw it before she did. One sharp glance skyward, and he was moving, bow in hand, eyes hardening. Ada followed without thinking, the red blanket still draped across her shoulders. It wasn't until they crested the ridge that she understood. A cabin was burning. Not the town. Not her father's land. But one of the way stations, a resting post for riders and traders, built years ago by settlers who came and left just as fast. Now it roared with orange teeth, spitting sparks into the sky. But what made Ada stop wasn't the fire. It was the girl, no older than 10, standing frozen outside the flames, clutching something, a doll, perhaps. Her dress was ash-streaked, her hair wild. She wasn't crying, just staring, trapped by fear. "She's not moving," Ada said. "She will," Wikasa murmured, "when she realizes no one's coming." Ada didn't think. She ran. Through the brush, over broken roots, across dry patches that crackled under her boots. The heat slapped her as she neared, smoke clawing at her throat. But the girl still hadn't moved. "Hey," Ada called out, coughing. "Can you walk?" The girl blinked once, twice, then shook her head. "My brother's inside." Ada hesitated. The roof had already begun to collapse. Flames curled around the doorway like claws. "Wikasa!" she yelled, but he was already moving, circling the far side with something in his arms, a hide wrap soaked in water from his canteen. He threw it to Ada. "Around your face. I'll go in." Ada wrapped it quick, dropping to her knees beside the girl. "We're not going to let it end like this," she whispered. The girl clutched her hand tight. Moments later, Wikasa emerged from the smoke with a boy slung over his shoulder, coughing but breathing. He set him down gently, eyes meeting Ada's for just a second. Not proud, not relieved, just present, like always. They waited until the flames began to die on their own. No one came, no riders, no townsfolk, just the four of them, alone by the ruin of something no one claimed. The girl stared at Ada like she was something impossible. "You're the one from the whipping," she said softly. Ada didn't flinch. "Yes." The girl tilted her head. "You're not what they said." "Neither are you," Ada replied. And in that moment, it was clear. They weren't lost. Just waiting to be found. By the right fire. They made shelter that night in the bones of an old trader's hut Wikasa found near the ridge. A single wall still standing, roof gone. But it was enough. The children didn't speak much. The boy coughed until Ada wrapped him in Wikasa's blanket and pressed a poultice Mato had left behind. The girl refused to sleep unless Ada lay beside her. No questions were asked. There was no need. That night, Ada didn't think about shame, or towns, or the dress she'd once sewn with pearls down the back. She thought about what she was building, not with nails or laws, but with presence, in the quiet, in the choosing. "They'll ask," she said suddenly, staring into the embers. Wikasa looked over. "About them. About who they are, who we are, why they're with us." Wikasa poked the fire gently. "They can ask. And what do I tell them?" He shrugged. "The truth you live is stronger than the lie they tell." She smiled at that, crooked, worn. "That's not how it worked where I came from." "Then stop coming from there." His words were soft, not a command, a permission. In the morning, the girl, Hattie, asked what Ada's full name was. Ada paused. It used to be Ada Mayfield. Hattie tilted her head. Used to? I'm not her anymore. The boy, Caleb, watched her carefully. Then who are you now? Ada thought of the blood on the post, the fire in the cabin, the weight of a stranger's hand that didn't press her down but lifted her gently. Ada no wife, she said finally. Ada no daughter. Ada no property. Just Ada. Wicasa nodded once. That's enough. They walked that day. Not toward town, not toward any path that could be drawn on a map. Wicasa knew a place near the springs where cottonwoods grew thick and deer passed through often. He said the land had been left alone, even by the soldiers. There they could build, not a camp, not a hideout, but something rooted. The children followed without asking. Caleb walked behind Wicasa, mimicking his quiet step. Hattie held Ada's hand tightly, swinging it now and then like they were already family. When they reached the clearing, Ada stopped. Do you think we'll always be running? She asked. Wicasa looked around. The sun filtered through leaves like it was blessing them without words. No, he said. I think we stopped. Ada looked at the children, then the trees. Then I guess we start. Not over. Not again. Just forward. With nothing owed. Nothing begged. Only chosen. Spring arrived like it was trying to apologize for everything that had come before. The trees at the edge of their clearing bloomed early, pink against the blue sky, while the lean-to became a cabin, then a home. Walls of stacked logs, a fire pit ringed with stones, shelves carved by Caleb's careful hands. Hattie learned to sew from Ada. Not dresses for weddings, but satchels, blankets, slings for gathering roots. Wicasa carved, always carving, tools, bowls, toys, and sometimes small figures Ada never asked about, but always found placed quietly where she'd see them. A woman standing tall, a girl holding a flame, a horse facing west. But the post haunted her. Not with fear, but unfinishedness. So one morning, Ada returned. Not to beg, not to challenge, just to see. The town hadn't changed much. Dry Creek was still small and dusty, the church bell still cracked, the saloon louder than it should be. But the square was quiet. The post remained, stained, splintered, forgotten. She walked to it slowly, red blanket across her shoulders, head high. The few who noticed her froze. A child tugged at her mother's skirt, whispering, "Is that her?" A man tipped his hat, then looked away. Ada didn't speak. She simply reached into her satchel and pulled out a bundle. Inside, a strip of deerskin, hand-painted with symbols, fire, water, 2 small children, and a tree with roots curled around a heart. She tied it to the post, tight and clean. Her hands didn't shake. "This is no longer yours," she said to no one in particular. "It's mine now." She turned and walked away. No one stopped her. At the edge of town, Wicasa waited with the horse. Caleb and Hattie sat behind him, both holding baskets of seeds. Ada mounted up silently. "Did they speak?" he asked. "They remembered," she said. "And that's enough." As they rode back toward the clearing, Ada looked out over the land they now called home. The soil was soft. The river nearby sang instead of roared. A row of stones marked a future garden. A single fire smoked at the center, and around it their lives were built. Not from what was given, but from what had been taken and then reclaimed. She would never be Ada Mayfield again. Never someone's bride, someone's burden, someone's transaction. She was Ada, just Ada. And the world, at last, had learned to say her name without asking who she belonged to. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on stories left behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.